1933 brought an uncertain silence and, at the same time, a deep tension to the streets of Germany. As the Weimar Republic took its final breaths, a man was stepping into power in Berlin, Adolf Hitler. He had a single, clear objective: the elimination of elements that corrupted the German race. Jews were no longer seen merely as a minority. In official rhetoric, they were declared the cause of Germany's economic and social problems. Dismissals from jobs, boycotts, and exclusion from public spaces were the first signals sent by the state. At that time, the Frank family was living in Frankfurt. Otto Frank was a hard-working man involved in postal and banking affairs. Edith Frank was busy protecting her home and children. Anne was only 4 years old, a cheerful child trying to understand the world. But a dark shadow loomed over the family, the steadily increasing pressure on Jews in Germany. The bank where her father worked had dismissed Jewish employees. Small businesses were boycotted, and every day they were forced to see signs hung on doors reading, "Jews not allowed." Although Anne did not yet fully understand this discrimination, she noticed the worry on her father's face and the silent trembling of her mother. Otto Frank began searching for a solution to protect his family. Living in Germany had become dangerous. Quietly, the family packed their suitcases and decided to move to the Netherlands. Amsterdam seemed like a safe harbor at the time, a point of escape for Jews. Change in Germany was progressing rapidly. Hitler had not only come to power, but had also begun reshaping laws and regulations. Jews were expelled from civil service, restricted from schools and universities, and gradually erased from the business world. While official state measures were being implemented, attacks in the streets were increasing, and Jewish shops were being boycotted. Anne's family had to be more cautious with each passing day. When they went outside, they measured the looks of neighbors and their surroundings. A small mistake or a wrong word could lead to dangerous consequences. For Anne, the world was still full of play and curiosity, but adult anxiety was seeping into her small universe. Her father, Otto, constantly told his daughters, "Always do what is right, but don't forget your safety." These words would later become the foundation for their hiding and survival, guiding Anne's life. For Hitler, these early years were not only about consolidating his power, but also about testing ways to restrict Jews socially and economically. For Anne Frank, however, this was the beginning of her family's search for a safe life, a period when a small child's innocent curiosity intertwined with fear and concern. Two worlds had intersected, one driven by fear and power, the other by hope and the effort to protect. 1935 marked the beginning of a new and frightening era for Germany. The Nuremberg Laws came into force. These laws stripped Jews not only from society, but also from official state documents and rights. They could no longer be German citizens, were banned from many professions, and faced restrictions on access to schools and universities. The state reinforced social division through law. On the streets, there was not only hostility, but discrimination enforced by official authority. Jews living in Germany no longer felt safe. At that time, Anne Frank and her family had already moved to the Netherlands. Otto Frank had made this decision long in advance to protect his family. In Amsterdam, they found a small house and tried to rebuild their lives. However, being in a new country did not mean everything was safe. Anne's father saw the fact that the Netherlands was not yet under Nazi occupation as a consolation, but he consciously calculated future dangers. For Anne, life was different from Germany, yet just as complex. She started school after arriving in the Netherlands. In the early days, she played with friends, drew pictures, and immersed herself in fairy tale. But she soon realized how difficult it was to be a foreigner, to speak a different language, and to measure the looks of those around her. As a small child, she began to ask more clearly, why are we different? During these years, Otto Frank searched for work, while Edith Frank maintained order at home. The Netherlands offered a short-term zone of safety. Yet Anne's eyes began to notice small troubles. Jewish children were still banned from certain places and excluded from specific activities. Anne was slowly understanding that being different was not only a physical distinction, but a social reality. The laws and practices in Germany cast a shadow over their lives in the Netherlands. Otto Frank constantly followed the news and prepared the family for possible threats. Anne, meanwhile, even while playing with friends, began to feel her differences more clearly. This awareness would later form the basis of the questions and thoughts she would write in her diary. While Hitler continued to pass laws and systematically segregate Jews in Germany, Anne Frank's family was seeking shelter, trying to preserve their hope. On one side stood the state's harsh and planned oppression. On the other, a small child's world filled with play and curiosity. Two different realities progressed silently in parallel. A law was signed, a child stepped into a new language and a new school. November 1938 was a dark turning point for Jews in Germany. During the attacks known as Kristallnacht, synagogues were burned, Jewish shops were destroyed, and hundreds of Jews were arrested. Berlin, Munich, and other cities were filled with the silent screams of fear and destruction. For the first time, many people around the world clearly saw the scale of mass persecution carried out with state support. Anne Frank was 5 years old at the time, living in Amsterdam. She was still very young, but she could sense her family's worries. Her father, Otto Frank, followed the news from Germany and prepared the family for potential dangers. For Anne, the world was still full of games and fairy tales, yet a quiet tension filled the house. With each passing day, it became clear that the outside world was not safe. By 1940, the Nazi occupation had reached the Netherlands. German soldiers patrolled the streets, restrictions on Jews increased, and certain workplaces and schools were closed to them. At Anne's school, Jewish children were placed in separate classes. Even while playing with friends, she had to confront differences and limitations. During this period, Anne decided to write down what she felt and observed. A small diary became her gateway to the world. 1942 was a critical turning point for the Frank family. Anne had turned 13 and had begun keeping a diary. At first, she wrote ordinary thoughts of a child, but over time, the impact of Nazi persecution on their lives filled her pages. Her father's efforts to find work, her mother's silent worry at home, the bans and dangers outside, each was recorded in a meaningful and touching way through the eyes of a young girl. When reading Anne's diary, one sees not only a child's curiosity, but also humanity tested by fear and hope. Sentences such as, "Today we didn't see anyone. The street was quiet. Father is constantly reading the news. I just want to play, but it feels like the world is full of a silent danger," reflect the effects of war and persecution through her eyes. These years were a time of constant escape planning and precaution for the Frank family. Anne's decision to keep a diary arose from both a need to protect her inner world and to make sense of her family and loved ones. While the outside world was full of chaos and fear, a child inside the home was creating her own safe harbor through words. From Kristallnacht onward, when Nazi occupation reached the Netherlands, Anne Frank and her family were living directly under the shadow of persecution. Gradually, they began to question the safety of their own home. Every outing, buying food or simply taking a walk, had become a risky act. Yet Anne's pen moved forward courageously, despite the fear. Her words reflected both the innocence of childhood and the human determination to survive under harsh conditions. The summer of 1942 marked another critical turning point for the Frank family in Amsterdam. The forced deportation of Jewish youth to labor camps and the visible presence of soldiers and police prompted Otto Frank to act. He realized that safety could exist not only at home, but in an invisible refuge. Hiding had become the only way to survive. In July 1942, Anne Frank and her family moved into the secret annex at Prinsengracht 263. It was a small, cramped space, accessible through a hidden staircase inside the building. From that day on, the family's daily life changed completely. Silence and caution ruled the daytime. Anxiety and prayer filled the nights. Any sound from outside, any footstep, created deep fear within them. For Anne, the diary was no longer just words. It became a tool for survival and resistance. On every page, a child's innocence stood side by side with the shadow of war. Today, we had to remain silent. Every sound could be a messenger of death. But I am writing. Writing is like breathing. In her diary, she described daily routines, conflicts among them, and their fears. Not only the Nazi threat, but also the confinement of hiding, limited food, and the tension of living in close quarters shaped their lives. Anne united fear and hope on the same pages. Her father's patience, her mother's anxiety, Margot's calmness, all were recorded through her eyes. In 1943 and 1944, Nazi persecution intensified in the Netherlands. The number of Jews sent to concentration camps increased, and inspections in the streets became more frequent. The hidden annex became more vital with each passing day. Yet Anne continued to write despite the fear. Her diary served both to help her understand her own world and as a silent witness that lifted her family's morale. Anne Frank's time in hiding was a period that brought together the innocence of childhood and human resilience. Each day required silence, caution, and planning to survive. The diary became not just a notebook, but a symbol of hope and resistance. Through Anne's eyes, life in hiding resembled a prison, yet through words, she never severed her connection with the world. Sadly, toward the end of 1944, their hiding place was discovered. The Frank family was found by Nazi forces and sent first to concentration camps. Anne and Margot lost their lives in Bergen-Belsen, and Otto Frank was the only surviving family member. During the time in hiding, Anne had written the darkest days of her life in her small red notebook. The diary contained her fear, hope, struggle for survival, and inner childhood world. When the hiding place was discovered, the diary's existence was endangered. Nazi authorities searched the house, but the diary miraculously remained hidden. Miep Gies and her colleagues, responsible for cleaning and organizing the secret annex, found Anne's notebooks when they entered the hiding place. Miep kept the diaries to return them to Otto Frank. When Otto Frank learned what had happened to Anne and his family in Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen, the diary became the only surviving piece of his daughter. It was the silent witness of lost lives, unfulfilled childhoods, and Nazi persecution. Otto Frank decided to protect Anne's words and share them with the world. The diary was first edited in German and Dutch. Otto wanted to convey Anne's spirit and story as faithfully as possible. In 1947, it was published in the Netherlands under the title Het Achterhuis. The diary quickly drew attention because it was not merely a child's memoir, but an inner testimony of Nazi persecution. From the 1950s onward, the diary was translated into many languages and reached millions of people worldwide. Readers encountered Anne's innocence, fears, hopes, and the way the human spirit can endure even in the darkest times. The diary became not just a notebook, but a symbol of human rights, peace, and tolerance. Today, the diary is exhibited at the Anne Frank House Museum in Amsterdam. Every year, hundreds of thousands of visitors see the rooms where Anne hid and the words she wrote. The diary stands as a reminder that history must not be forgotten. The voice of a child became a universal message reaching millions. Thanks to the efforts of Miep Gies and Otto Frank, Anne's diary shed light on humanity despite the darkness created by Hitler. Every page became proof of resistance, hope, and the immortality of the human spirit. This story is a testimony of a world that has fallen into darkness, seen through the eyes of a child. Anne Frank's story is not only the story of a family trying to survive in hiding, but also the story of a consciousness forced to grow under oppression. This narrative tells of thoughts shaped within narrow walls, far from the noise of war, of hope that can exist alongside fear, and of how words can keep a person standing. Anne's diary does not recount the great events of history, but reveals the fractures those events create within an individual's inner world. The lines you're about to read carry the traces not of a victim, but of a young mind that chose to bear witness. This story is a quiet yet enduring reminder of what must never be forgotten.
I was born on June 12, 1929, in Frankfurt. As I write this, I still do not know exactly what I feel, because a person cannot remember the day they were born. Yet when they begin to question where their life belongs, they realize the importance of the place they came from. Germany is, for me, nothing more than a childhood memory. I laughed there, played there, walked there, but I could not stay there. When people decide one day that they no longer want you, the place you once called home suddenly becomes unfamiliar. My father realized this before anyone else. My mother understood later. I understood last, because children measure the world not by dangers, but by games, until the playgrounds are taken away. In 1933, everything changed. They describe it as if it happened in a single day, but no. The change was quiet. First the looks changed, then the voices, then the doors. When my father took us to the Netherlands, I thought it was temporary. It felt like a new adventure. In Amsterdam, there was a new language, new friends, and a new life. I felt free. At that time, I still did not know that everything I wrote would one day matter so much. Writing replaced the moments when I could not speak. When I spoke, people found me too much. But when I wrote, no one silenced me. In 1940, when the Germans entered the Netherlands, I felt once again that things were quietly disappearing. At first, they were small things. My bicycle, gone. The parks, gone. Some friends at school, gone. Then came the star. The yellow star sewn onto my jacket stripped me of myself and turned me into nothing but a Jew. When people looked at me, they no longer saw me. They saw the star. That day I wrote, "We have been divided into Jews and non-Jews." When I wrote that sentence, I did not know how true it was, but today, looking back, I see that it sums up my life. For my birthday, they gave me a notebook. It was red and white checkered. I named it Kitty, because everyone needs someone with whom they can share their secrets. For me, that someone was Kitty. On the first page I wrote, "I hope I will be able to confide everything to you, as I have never been able to confide in anyone before." From that day on, writing became like breathing. If I did not write, something inside me suffocated. In 1942, the letter that arrived from Margot accelerated everything. We were going into hiding. The place we were going to was a secret annex behind a house. The word sounds innocent, but fear lives inside it. When we entered the secret annex, I thought it would last a short time. A few weeks, and maybe a few months. When people live with fear, they try to make time smaller. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Silence was our greatest rule. We took off our shoes. We closed the curtains. Even while breathing, we had to be careful. While people walked outside, we froze in place. Living in the secret annex changed me. My relationship with my mother grew distant. I knew I loved her, but I felt that she did not understand me. My father, on the other hand, was my refuge. I admired him. I wanted him to be the first to read what I wrote. I thought about Peter. First, I felt embarrassed, then I grew accustomed to it. Being noticed by someone is like a small light lit in the dark. But I did not write only about love. I wrote about how people treat one another, how fear makes people smaller, how power poisons. One day I wrote, "I still believe in people's desire to do good." When I wrote this, I knew what was happening outside. Despite that, I believed. Because if I did not believe, my life would have had no meaning. We listened to speeches on the radio. We learned about the course of the war. When I heard that what I wrote could one day be published, I looked at my notebook differently. I was no longer only pouring out my feelings. I was bearing witness. What I wrote was not proof of my life alone, but proof of what we lived through. On the morning of August 4th, 1944, when the door opened, everything ended. Everything secret was revealed. I do not remember being afraid. There was a strange calm. Perhaps when a person reaches the end, They no longer have the strength to cry. Westerbork, Auschwitz, then Bergen-Belsen. I lost my mother, I lost Margot, I lost myself. But what I wrote remained. Before I died, I had written, "As long as I can write, I can get over anything." I could not write, but what I wrote continued to write. When we were taken off the train, I did not know where we were, but I immediately understood that this was not the secret annex. Here, the walls did not speak, and neither did the people. Everyone was silent, but this silence was not like ours. In the secret annex, we had chosen silence in order to survive. Here, silence had been taken away from people. In Westerbork, and days were measured by numbers. Who arrived, who left, who was selected. People stopped being names and turned into lists. That was the first time I felt incomplete because I could not write. I had no pen, I had no notebook, I had no kitty. The words that accumulated inside me hit the walls and came back to me. Margot was quieter than I was. She always tried to look strong, but at night I could feel her trembling. My mother had grown very weak. My father was still standing upright. Watching him, I realized that I was no longer a child. Childhood ended somewhere there, but I cannot say exactly where. Perhaps when the train door closed, perhaps at the first roll call, perhaps when I saw the expression on my mother's face. When we arrived at Auschwitz, everything became even more abstract. There was no time here. There were mornings and evenings, but the days blended into one another. People disappeared beside me. I do not remember the moment I last saw my mother. That is the thing that frightens me the most. A person wants to remember losing someone they love, but sometimes memory abandons a person as well. When Margot and I were sent to Bergen-Belsen, we were already very tired. Hunger had made our bodies smaller. The cold seeped into our bones. But being with Margot gave me strength. She was my sister. She was the quiet part of my childhood. When I lost her, a void opened inside me. Then illness came. Fever, shivering. When I closed my eyes, I saw the secret annex. The window with the curtains drawn, the staircase, the bookshelf. I thought of Kitty, of what I had written, of the days when I believed we would one day leave that place. When I wrote, I felt that I belonged to the future. The future was now very far away, but I still believed this. Even despite everything, a person can carry something good inside. When I thought this, I was very weak, but thinking kept me standing. Then a silence came. This time, it was not frightening. It was as if everything slowed down. If someone is to speak in my place, I would like them to know this. I was not just a girl in hiding. I was someone who thought, someone who questioned, someone who wanted to write. My life was left unfinished, but my sentences were not. My father survived. He read what I had written. He came to know me again. My words were no longer mine. They belonged to the world. When someone one day reads what I wrote, I want them to see me not as someone to be pitied, but as someone who thought. Because I was afraid, but I was not without hope. I hid, but I was not silenced. If someone is reading these lines one day, let them know that I lived. It was short, but I truly lived. And I wrote. I do not think it is possible to get used to the secret annex, although they say that people get used to everything. I never fully believed that. The word getting used to feels like acceptance to me. I did not accept it, I simply endured it. In the first days, time moved very slowly. Even the ticking of the clock felt as if it made too much noise. During the day, everyone had to stay in their place. While people working in the office walked below, we were frozen above. I remember how my heart would race when footsteps approached the stairs. It was as if my heart did not know how to hide either. At first, the secret annex felt mysterious to me. The staircase, the revolving bookcase, the small rooms. I felt as if I were inside a story. But stories usually end. Ours did not. As the days went by, the space grew narrower. The walls seemed to draw closer. People grew bigger, nerves grew thinner. I struggled most with my mother. I thought she did not understand me. I felt that she found me too much. When I wrote this in my diary, I felt guilty, but I wrote it anyway. One day I wrote, "My mother has never really known me." That sentence was heavy, but it needed to come out of me. My father was different. With him, I could be myself. I felt that he trusted me. He took what I wrote seriously. That was very important to me. Because I wanted to be taken seriously. In the secret annex, we were not only hiding, we were also watching one another. They say that people show their true faces in difficult times. I learned that there. Small things turned into big arguments. A plate, a word, a look. But there was also solidarity. Fear bound us to one another. Peter was very quiet at first. I had written that I found him boring. Then he changed. Or perhaps I changed. Or I began to see him more carefully. When we went up to the attic, seeing the sky outside made me feel better. The sky was still there. It reminded me that the world had not completely disappeared. One day I wrote, "If I can still look at the clouds, then freedom has not completely vanished." That thought kept me standing. Writing was no longer just a habit for me. It was a way of getting to know myself. I wrote about my bad sides too, my jealousy, my selfishness, my anger, because I was not claiming to be a good person. I wanted to be a real person. I grew up in the secret annex, both physically and mentally. I experienced my transition from childhood to youth there. This transition was silent but deep. While people were dying outside, new questions were being born inside me. I thought about God. I thought about justice. I thought about why people could be so cruel. I could not find answers, but I did not stop asking. One day, I wrote in my diary, "Why are people so afraid of one another?" That question kept me awake at night. As time passed in the secret annex, hope also changed. At first, hope was getting out, then hope was surviving. Later, hope became being able to write. The news coming from the radio created waves inside us. The Allies were advancing. Liberation felt close. That feeling kept us standing. I was now imagining my future more clearly. I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer. One day I wrote, "After the war, I want to live and write." My hands trembled as I wrote that sentence, because for the first time, I had spoken about the future so openly. Every day I spent in the secret annex made me a more attentive person. I learned to observe people, I learned to listen to myself, I learned to hear the voices within silence. If I were ever to leave this place, I knew I would not be the same. But I had to believe that that day would come, because if I did not believe, I could not write. And if I did not write, I would disappear. As time passed in the secret annex, I began to feel as if I were split in two. One part of me was still an impatient child who wanted to laugh, while the other was heavier, weighing every word, trying to read people's intentions. These two parts sometimes collided with one another. When I looked at my diary, I could see this clearly. On the same day, I could write sentences that complained and sentences that were full of hope. This did not frighten me. On the contrary, it made me feel real, because a person is not made up of a single emotion. I learned this in the secret annex. A person can be both strong and fragile at the same time. I did not hide this when I wrote. I did not want to make myself look good. I wrote when I was angry. I wrote when I was jealous. I wrote when I was ashamed. One day, I wrote in my diary, "Paper is more patient than people." That sentence was very important to me, because people often wanted to silence me, but paper did not fall silent. Paper listened. As I wrote, my thoughts became more orderly. My fears changed shape and became more manageable. One of the things I struggled with most in the secret annex was waiting. Waiting exhausts a person. Waiting multiplies thoughts. A weight with no known end gnaws at the inside of a person. But writing while waiting turned time into something else. Days stopped being empty spaces. Each day left a trace. My closeness with Peter also changed during this time. I no longer saw him only as a friend. This feeling made me both happy and afraid, because everything here was limited, even emotions. Still, I did not deny these feelings. I wrote them in my diary, because writing was not denial. Writing was acceptance. My conflicts with my mother continued. When I felt that she was criticizing me, I felt a great anger inside. Then I felt ashamed of myself. Because my mother was afraid too. It took time for me to understand this. In the secret annex, empathy is learned, but it is learned late. First, a person tries to save themselves. My father tried to remain balanced in the middle of all this confusion. When I looked at him, I saw that a person could remain kind, even under harsh conditions. He became an example for me. My writing gradually became more conscious. One day I began to reorganize my notebook. I changed some sentences. I wrote others more clearly, because I realized that I was no longer writing only for Kitty. One day, others might read it too. This thought excited me. It did not frighten me. I wanted what I wrote to have meaning. One day I wrote, "After the war, I want not only to live, but to tell what I have lived through." This was a decision for me. Writing was no longer a dream. It had become a goal. The news from outside sometimes lifted us up and sometimes slammed us back down. When we heard about the Normandy landings, a great hope rose inside me. I thought liberation was near. This hope made my writing bolder. I began to write about the future more clearly. I started to feel like an adult, but then suddenly the sound of an explosion or news of a raid shattered that feeling. Fear returned. Still, I realized something. Fear could no longer silence me. One day, I wrote this sentence in my diary: "As long as I can write, I can get over anything." That sentence became the branch I held onto. Growing up in the secret annex was fast and painful, but it made me who I am. I learned to understand people, to question myself, to think about justice. One day, I wrote at length about God in my notebook. I asked why he remained silent, but then I also wrote this: "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are truly good at heart." This sentence may seem naive, but for me, it was the only way to survive. If I had not believed this, I would have fallen apart here, between these narrow walls, in this silent waiting. The secret annex did not make me smaller. It enlarged the world inside me, and I did not want to lose that world. Hope in the secret annex was not a constant thing. It was like a visitor who came and went. Some mornings, it was not inside me at all. Some evenings, it overflowed everywhere. The news coming from the radio made us move back and forth between hope and fear. When we heard that the Allies were advancing, I felt a warmth inside me. This warmth did not warm my body, but my thoughts. I repeated the word liberation silently to myself. We did not dare say it out loud because even hope could attract attention. But I wrote it in my diary. One day I wrote, "When I hear the word freedom, my heart beats faster." As I wrote that sentence, I felt as if I had brought the word a little closer to me. As the days passed, what I wrote became more orderly and more conscious. My notebook was no longer just a place where I poured out my feelings. It had become a workspace. I reviewed my sentences, changed some of them, and made others stronger. The idea of becoming a writer had become clear in my mind. I did not want only to live. I wanted to tell. One day I wrote, "After the war, I want to become a journalist." This was a dream, but at the same time, it was a decision. Writing in the secret annex taught me discipline. Even if I could not write every day, I accumulated my thoughts. I observed people's behavior more carefully. I noticed who became impatient and when, and how others hid their fear. These observations made me stronger. Because understanding reduced fear, the distance between my mother and me changed somewhat. I began to see more clearly that she was also struggling. This did not soften me completely, but I tried to be fairer. My father was still my center. His presence gave me a sense of security. My closeness with Peter also took on a calmer form during this time. My emotions were settling into place. Even love had to grow up in the secret annex. It could not be childish. The sounds of explosions, sirens, and airplanes from outside disturbed my sleep at night. But these sounds no longer completely paralyzed me. Fear was there, but I had grown accustomed to it. This habit was dangerous, but unavoidable. One day I wrote in my diary, "Getting used to fear is not the same as loving it." I wanted to make this distinction. Because I accepted fear, but I was not surrendering to it. Surrender would have meant stopping writing. As I wrote, I felt more real. I was proving that I existed. Sometimes I imagined the future. I imagined returning to school, walking in the streets, sitting in a cafe. These dreams were small and ordinary, but they felt enormous to me. Because being ordinary had become a luxury. One day I wrote, "Even an ordinary life feels like a miracle." That sentence meant a great deal to me. As time passed in the secret annex, I began to say goodbye to the child inside me. This farewell was silent. I do not know exactly when it happened. But one day, while reading what I had written, I noticed a more serious voice. This did not frighten me, because growing up was not losing something. It was transforming. The world outside was still dangerous, but inside I had built a place for myself. That place was made of words. Even if one day I could not leave here, I felt that these words would reach somewhere. I do not know why I felt this, but I believed it. And belief, like hope, keeps a person standing. Every day I lived in the secret annex taught me this. A person can lose everything, but must not lose the power to think. I did not lose it, and I was determined not to lose it. In Bergen-Belsen, time no longer moved like a line. We were inside a fog with no beginning and no end. It became difficult to tell whether it was day or night. I felt as if my body no longer belonged to me. The fever rose, then fell, then rose again. Hunger was constant, but it no longer hurt. A person also gets used to pain. The hardest thing was thinking, because the more I thought, the clearer what I had lost became. I thought about my mother. I tried to remember her voice. Sometimes her face was clear, sometimes it faded. This frightened me. Something more terrifying than losing someone is beginning to forget them. Margot was beside me, but she was very weak. I listened to her breathing. Sometimes it became very quiet. In those moments, my heart would race. I was afraid something would happen to her, because she was my family. After my father, she was the only bond I had left, but I knew. Here, you know even the things you do not want to know. Hope was no longer an idea, it was a habit. Like a repeated movement used to hold on. My thoughts often went back to the secret annex, to the narrow rooms, the closed curtains, the bookshelf. I tried to remember the sentences I had written there. One in particular I repeated, "In spite of everything, I still believe that people are truly good at heart." When I wrote that sentence, I thought about how young I was. But I did not regret it, because if I had not believed that, everything would have been meaningless. Even here, sometimes I felt incomplete because I could not write. My hands were empty, there was no paper, no pen, but the words were in my mind. I formed my sentences silently, as if one day someone would hear them, as if one day I might be able to write again. As my body grew weaker, my thoughts became clearer. I understood how short life could be, but the issue was not its shortness, it was its depth. In a short time, I had felt many things. Fear, love, anger, hope, all of them were real. And I was real too. One day, Margot could no longer get up. I watched her. She did not speak. She only looked at me. In that look, there was a farewell. When I lost her, I could not cry. I had no tears left. But a silence formed inside me, a very deep silence. That silence wrapped around me. I was very tired now, but I knew one thing clearly. If someone were to speak in my place, they should tell the truth. We were not just people in hiding. We were people who thought, who felt, who dreamed. I wanted to show this. If one day someone reads what I wrote, I want them to know this. I was afraid, but I did not remain silent. I was hopeless at times, but I did not stop believing. One day I had written, "As long as I can write, I can get over anything." That sentence carried me this far. What comes after this is no longer in my hands. But my words can live, my father can live, those live. Who read can live. I did not want to be a statistic, I wanted to be a thought. If these lines touch someone's heart, then it means I am still here. And that is enough for me.
Anne Frank's story ends here, but her voice does not fall silent. In one of the darkest periods of history, she was not merely a child in hiding. She became a thinking, questioning, and witnessing consciousness. What she lived through did not destroy her. On the contrary, it was transformed into words. Her diary revealed a side of war that cannot be told through numbers and maps. Through the eyes of a child, it showed how fear becomes ordinary, how hope remains stubborn, and how humanity does not completely disappear even under the harshest conditions. Anne's writings are not the legacy of a tragedy, but of memory. Though her life was short, she left a long trace as a thought. Today, when her name is mentioned, we remember not only a victim, but the resilience of the human spirit. Anne Frank's story teaches us this. A person can be silenced, imprisoned, even destroyed. But if words are written at the right time, they continue to carry the truth. That is why Anne is still read, still sought to be understood, and still lives. Anne Frank's diary is not merely a book that tells a tragedy from the past. It is a powerful testimony that reminds us what it means to be human. This work opens to the reader the mind of a child who was forced to grow up in the midst of war and persecution. A mind that did not stop thinking, questioning, and hoping even within narrow walls. The lines that flow from Anne's pen fill the cold facts of history with human warmth. Days spent under the shadow of bombs, prohibitions, and fear are intertwined with a young girl's dreams, anger, contradictions, and process of growing up. In this respect, the book is not only a war diary, but a universal story of growth and humanity. What makes Anne Frank's diary special is the depth its author shows despite her young age. Anne questions herself with open-hearted honesty. She criticizes her family, the people around her, and the world. Thanks to this sincerity, the reader comes to know Anne not as a historical figure, but as a real human being. Her fears, hopes, and dreams are timeless. They leave the same impact even when read today. Reading this book is not only about understanding the past, but about living the present more consciously. Because Anne Frank's diary reminds us of this, a human being can continue to think, write, and hope under any circumstances. If there is a book that will both shake you and make you question your faith in humanity, that book is Anne Frank's diary. That is why Anne Frank is still read, because her words could not be silenced, because this diary is the quietest yet most powerful voice of what must not be forgotten.